Hello, I'm David Orenstein. What's your name? Outstanding. Welcome to Bobby Pickles Podcast.
Bobby Pickles Podcast. He always says, "That's me." With a look on his face, he'll talk about anything.
Outstanding.
Tattoos, t-shirts, politics, history, and hot sauce on everything. Bobby Pickles. Pop culture, documentaries, conspiracy theories, sarcasm, and beer. It's a conversation. Start listening, cause we're all here. Bobby Pickles Podcast.
That's me. Hello, I'm Bobby Pickles. What's your name? Awesome. What's the most awesome thing in the universe? Is it consciousness? Is it our own humanity? Is it the vastness of space? The randomness of life? Is it God? Is God the most awesome thing in the universe? Is there even a God? Are you a believer or are you an atheist? Perhaps you're a secularist or a yogist. Maybe you don't necessarily believe in a quote-unquote God, but you are very spiritual. Are you a materialist? Is the acquisition of new or extravagant possessions your God? The great American writer and stand-up comedian Mark Twain, I think, put it best when he said, "Some men worship rank, some worship heroes, some worship power, some worship God, and over these ideals they dispute and cannot unite, but they all worship money." I felt that quote harbored so much raw truth, I had it tattooed on my ribcage like 10 years ago. So, is money our God? I feel it is, at least in this country. I mean, we print "In God We Trust" on our currency. Are they trying to tell us something? It used to be "E pluribus unum," out of many, one. That was the U.S. motto up until 1956, when Congress passed an act replacing it. Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of dig the old motto. I feel it sums us up much more accurately than "In God We Trust." I mean, what happened to separation of church and state? Okay, I understand the word God can be applied generally, but why even set the precedent? You know, as I ponder my own beliefs, I find it difficult to just say with absolute conviction that there is no God. I had a very Catholic upbringing. I was sent to parochial schools my entire life. I was an altar boy, for Christ's sakes, and no priests ever touched me. Actually, there were many aspects of Catholicism that I found to be very positive. I mean, don't get me wrong, I feel organized religion is a complete crock of shit. But it's kind of difficult to completely remove the influence being brought up in an organized belief system has on you. Today, I subscribe more to the New Age way of thinking. I'm not so sure there's a sky god, but I do feel there is a universal energy and consciousness which connects us all, E pluribus unum, and everybody is neither better than nor below anybody else. I feel we are all equal, and we can accomplish anything we set our minds to by doing the thing, acting as if, and maintaining a positive outlook. I'm also a silly quack who frequently meditates and has been known on occasion to seriously take astrology into consideration. A well-orated Joel Osteen monologue can motivate the shit out of me. Plus, I have had 2 very real ghost experiences, and if you don't believe me, you can go fuck yourself. You've heard of Confucius? Well, I'm just confused, but I can still philosophize with the best of them. Epicurus, another ancient philosopher, comes to mind as I contemplate the existence of God. He had this to say regarding the subject. Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? In college, I wrote a paper on the history of religion. And through my research, I discovered that there were a number of parallels between the Christian views of Jesus and other religiosities, such as Greco-Roman mythologies, as well as those of ancient Egypt. For instance, the sun god Horus, who was worshipped nearly 1,000 years before the story of Jesus, was also born of a virgin, had a mother named Mary, a father named Joseph, was crucified next to 2 thieves, buried in a tomb, and rose again on the 3rd day. I think there's something like 46 similarities identified between these two. However, some of the comparisons are considered debatable. It's still interesting, though. Makes you think. Is it really all just a bullshit story? Here's what George Carlin has to say about it.
Religion has actually convinced people that there's an invisible man
living in the sky, who watches everything you do every minute of every day. And the Invisible Man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish, where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you. He loves you. He loves you, and he needs money. He always needs money. He's all-powerful, all-perfect, all-knowing, and all-wise. Somehow, just can't handle money. Religion takes in billions of dollars. They pay no taxes, and they always need a little more. Now, you talk about a good bullshit story. Holy shit.
But he loves you and needs your money. Ha 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 ha. Carlin is one of my all-time heroes. In fact, just recently I realized that most of the people I regard as my own personal heroes throughout history were in fact atheists. But I didn't have that epiphany until I watched a video on nyc-atheists.org, the official website of the nonprofit, nonpartisan educational association known as the New York City Atheists. There's a short film on the site highlighting some quite prominent movers and shakers of history, and I was extremely surprised by how many of them are deserving of their own Fat Enzo t-shirt. Anyways, on this episode of the podcast, Mr. Martini and I have a sit-down with Dr. David Orenstein, professor of anthropology at Medgar Evers College, a senior college in the CUNY system, located in Brooklyn, New York, and his friend and colleague, Dr. Tyson Gill, the author of Belief in Science and the Science of Belief, a guidebook for fact-based thinking. Both are avid freethinkers, activists, and members of the New York City Atheists Organization. Full disclaimer, although the following conversation was conducted on campus in the Carroll Street building at Medgar Evers College, it is important to note that any beliefs, opinions, or statements shared herein are solely those of Bobby Pickles, Adrian D. Martini, and our guests, Drs. David Orenstein and Tyson Gill. And we indemnify and hold harmless Medgar Evers College and the City University of New York as a whole of any or all heretical falsities we promote or proclaim. Without further ado, here's our conversation with Drs. David Orenstein and Tyson Gill.
Thatbobenzo.com, 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 thatbobenzo.com.
My day was fantastic.
Yeah?
Actually. Yeah. Perfect day. We are going to start some significant changes here at the library here. I was able to expand the hours with presidential support from our new president, Rudy Crew. Mm-hmm. And we're looking at doing a whole bunch of new technology innovation here at the college. And we've got a $21 million new library facility being built while we're in this temporary location. So every day is a good day here.
Now, you are on Twitter the Paleo Librarian.
That's right. And that's my website as well,
yes.
paleolibrarian.info. Yes.
And then for the listeners at home, your name is?
Dr. David Orenstein.
Dr. David Orenstein.
Yeah, all right. We'll
so
just
let's go
that.
through all the...
all right. So you want to know all the...
yes, the background.
Gory details.
Please.
Okay, so I have a bachelor's degree from City University in anthropology. Mm-hmm. And then I went for a master's degree in information studies and technology. Second master's degree from New York University, from the Wagner School, and then a PhD in education.
Okay.
And along the way, since anthropology remains my first love, I've been teaching basic anthropology, biological anthropology, comparative religion, sociology, all those areas of the social sciences, particularly related to human evolution, hominid evolution, comparative biology, comparative morphology of primates, things like that. That's sort of all because of Planet of the Apes in 1968. I was 6 years old, and that movie ruined me.
So what did you think about the remake?
Well, which one? The Tim Burton one was terrible.
Yeah, no, that one was awful.
The most recent one was pretty good.
A little better, yeah.
Yeah, a little
with
better.
With James Franco.
Yeah.
No, the Tim Burton one was the most awful thing ever. It was terrible.
Yeah.
It was awful. It was so bad.
I actually do like Mark Wahlberg, even though he's a so-so actor. But that movie was.
Yeah, and I like Tim Burton, and the hype was, ooh, Tim Burton is going to be a great spin and everything, and it was just my eyes were bleeding. It was so bad.
If he would have done it in Tim Burton style, but he did not.
Yeah.
It was awful.
Have you always been a staunch atheist?
Since the earliest memory of about 8 years old. You know, I grew up in a pretty secular home. My parents were believers, but they never forced us on anything. But for me, faith in anything that isn't what I would consider real and tangible, even at my earliest age, didn't seem to me to feel right. I always wanted evidence, and not just evidence based on authority, like you would find, you know, a priest or a rabbi saying, of course this is true, it's from the Bible. The circular logic of it has to be true because it's in this book. And how do you know this book is true? Well, because I say it is. Always seemed to escape me as being a good way to necessarily live your life. I mean, I found at a very early age that I can find the same parables about love and joy and sharing and being kind to other people without needing to have theology to do that. I can get that same high off of reading Mark Twain.
Oh, I love Mark Twain. Mark Twain is my favorite author.
There you go. So, yeah.
You have to show him. Show him the.
Show my tattoo?
Yeah, show him this tattoo. It's
All
a great
right.
tattoo.
Oh, wonderful.
Nice. I saw that on your
Oh, wait,
website.
I got it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it's cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway.
So for me, it was an easy leap to go into the field of the social sciences, especially anthropology, because then you're dealing with things that are of a scientific and factual nature, right?
Well, that was the question, because I wanted to find out if the atheism came before you started studying anthropology and evolution and whatnot, or it came after.
Oh, no, it came way before. I think the atheism was almost my natural state. In fact, I think that most people are born not believing, that we get indoctrinated.
We do.
You know, through our parents or through our community to believe what is really outlandish things that we're to just buy.
May I share?
Absolutely.
On the sake
1 second, please?
On faith. Sure, yeah.
No, I went to Catholic school my entire life.
You poor thing.
Yeah. I was sent to Catholic school my entire life. My Uncle Mark, actually, he always makes these like statements about higher education, like the liberal professors and stuff like that, liberal, you know, you've heard
Right,
these
the
things.
elites.
Yeah. So, but he said something, it triggered me, and I said, wait, are you saying you don't believe in evolution?
Uh-huh.
He's like, you were a monkey. I wasn't a monkey.
But you see, that's
I
the
couldn't believe.
misconception.
Couldn't believe
Yeah.
somebody 50 years old or something like that, a reasonably intelligent person, doesn't believe in evolution.
This
It
is
is
the
astounding.
problem, because especially with the monkey argument, it's not that, you know, and it always comes down to, well, if we evolved from monkeys or we evolved from apes, why are there still apes? Well, the reality is, and Darwin showed this, and everyone has shown this, Carl Sagan has shown this, and the science, most importantly, not to base it on authority, has shown this, is that, no, it's not that we evolved from chimpanzees. It's that chimpanzees and humans and all of the great apes and all of the primates have a common ancestor. That's really what Darwinian evolution is about. It's about change over time. It's about adaptation. It's about those types of biological concepts, or in reality, things that happen in real life.
And I think one of the biggest problems is for like people that are very Christian and stuff is obviously that they believe, you know, the Bible is, you know, I mean, it's like 6,000 to 10,000 years old is
Right,
how
the
old the
Earth
Earth
is
is.
6,000,
So
right,
for
you've got
them
the
to believe in
Creation Museum.
evolution, which the Earth is over what 4.5, 5 billion years old,
Right.
to, you know, it's been happening for so long, and that amount of time is just so much for people to even comprehend. And I think that
That's in fact a key point. I mean, one of the
Yeah.
reasons people have trouble believing is because they don't. It's hard to conceptualize the scale of these changes and the time period of the changes over which they occurred.
yeah.
And you know, often people will say like, "Well, why can't I see it happening?" Well, because these things take millions of years.
Yeah, exactly. And like I think what you were saying earlier about you know, people like were brought up by their parents. Now you have like that museum that opened up like 5 or 6 years ago, and I think it's by Cincinnati or Louisville, the Creationism.
The Creation Museum.
Yeah.
Ken Ham. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I saw this video, and it blew my mind. It absolutely just. I couldn't believe it. It was this guy, and he was kind of dressed like Dr. Grant from Jurassic Park. You know, he's like wearing the safari hat and stuff, and he's in this room with probably 200 children, and he has like this poster board, an animated poster board of a T-Rex dinosaur,
Right.
holding hands with a small child.
Right.
And he's preaching this as fact, like
Right.
that this is a real thing.
Can you imagine the mental gymnastics that you have to go through? And this is the problem that I have with faith, is that it's a closed system. One of the things I like about science, and I'm not saying that science is a perfect way of knowing, but I trust it more than just saying, oh, it's all based on faith, and it's my interpretation of this specific faith, because there could be different things and different, Jainism versus Hinduism versus Christianity versus Judaism and everything. Everyone's got a different spin on this stuff. And you must be able to show in your own mind that the world is 6,000 years old, which means that you have to ignore biology, chemistry, geology, physics, because all of those things that are part of our human knowledge, which are really good things, are saying something which is, I think, more beautiful than something that could ever be said in a book created 3,000 years ago by ancient farmers, which is that we're part of this incredible universe.
Yeah, by ignoring physics and math and all these different things is ignoring like the fundamentals of the universe, and you're just dismissing all of it.
Right, exactly.
And to be an adult and teach people that, like to believe that at that age, is just blows my mind. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Martine, you want to give some background? Isn't your brother part of some kind of atheist organization or something?
My brother helps with the starting of the National Atheist Party, the NAP.
Oh, NAP, yeah.
Yeah, he's vice president of outreach. Well, he was. I don't know. He kind of stepped back a little bit because he teaches in Chicago.
Okay.
And he just had a kid, but he still is always active with them. He went to San Francisco about 6 months ago for a rally they had there, went to D.C., and he's helped set up different chapters in every state. And we were all raised away. Like my mom, who's a Catholic, when we were children, she would let us go to different churches and see what we liked. And there's 5 of us, and just going to these different things, every single one of us by the age of 10 to 13 were atheists. Every single one of us, except for one. One of my sisters is not.
Okay.
But the other 4 of us are all atheists. And my mom, she's like, okay, whatever. She's like, it's not exactly what I believe. She's open-minded. But it just happened because she didn't force us to believe it or teach us that and, discipline us on these, facts, quote,
as David said, we're naturally atheists.
Exactly.
We're
Yeah, absolutely.
indoctrinated.
Like Penn says, if you want to become an atheist, just read the Bible.
Right, yeah.
Let's get the background on your colleague here, because we didn't do that.
Certainly.
Now, your name and your background and things like that.
I'm,
You're a part of the New York City Atheist organization, correct?
I am, and Dave and I initially met through that organization. There's lots of activities through that organization. David runs one subgroup, a book and video club meeting, and he was kind enough to do a session on my book one day. And so I'm a lifelong atheist. My background is in science. I was a chemist. I worked in chemistry research for many years, and then I went off to do software development, and so now I still do that. I taught grade school and high school science, and then college-level computer science, and now I work in the city here for a healthcare company, and was busy today working on Obamacare.
And your name is?
Tyson Gill.
Tyson Gill. And you wrote a book called Belief in Science and the Science of Belief, a guidebook to fact-based thinking.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about your book?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of the book is to not so much focus on bashing religion or bashing other forms of belief, but talking about the alternative, why facts are so important, why they're so often confused, and why they're so difficult sometimes to understand what facts are, and why we have such a predilection towards belief. Why is it that we believe? What are the evolutionary
Because we're
bases
scared
for
of
it?
dying.
Well, I
Right?
think there's
We all
many
fear death.
reasons. Yes, that's one of them. But I think it also had evolutionary benefits at one time. That doesn't mean those benefits are still good. Many species have died out because they had traits that at one time were helpful, but now they no longer are in a new environment. And I think that's the case with belief. I think I agree with
How
Bill
long
Maher.
have you felt like this?
I never felt otherwise.
Really?
I don't remember ever not being an atheist.
You were never. What were your parents?
Catholic.
Okay.
I was raised and went to Catholic school.
You did?
Yes. And I was the heretic of the school. I was kicked off of altar duty, and I was kicked off of being milk monitoring.
Really?
Because I was a little heretic, simply because I asked questions. And I wasn't even trying to be controversial. I was just asking, well, what about this? And I'd be sent out into the hallway disciplined.
Yeah, I was an altar boy. I was everything.
Really?
Oh my
Yeah.
God,
It was lots of fun.
So, David, you were telling me a little bit when we were talking before and trying to set up this interview about your background as a cultural Jewish Brooklynite, right? Who
Right.
comes from a long lineage of all these culturally Jewish, but they don't subscribe to the spiritual end of it, right?
Right.
Kind of like the Woody Allens and
Right. Like I
and
said,
Carl
pastrami is in
Sagan.
my blood.
Right.
Right.
What is it? Does it seem like there's a lot of American Jews that fall into non-belief?
It's hard for me to talk about the whole community because I don't want to make any statements that are so general that. But I think that what you find with a lot of Jews from New York is that you get a feeling of.
They're very intellectual.
Yeah, maybe it's more about questioning. Now, one of the traditions in Judaism is to actually ask questions,
Right.
Where maybe you don't find it in other faiths. And I think where maybe some of that tradition comes in, that there's always room in Judaism for debate. Of course, the final answer, like in most religions, is, of course, there's a God, and you better believe in him or it. And plus, I think with the Jewish experience in this country, coming from other countries where, there's pogroms and things like that, is this need to fit in and to occupy a certain social economic class that allows the group to maybe thrive. So you find a lot of professionals, you find a lot of academics, and you find that, and again, this is not saying everybody's like this, and I don't want to, do anything that seems stereotypical. That, I think, is part of the whole, that and comedy. You find a lot of Jews who are going into comedy to want to also, be liked, be part of something bigger, stuff like that.
And just anecdotally, as a case in point, I have one young friend. She was in the Peace Corps with me, and she's clearly an atheist, and she converted to Judaism.
What?
And I asked her, well, why would you do that? And she said, well, because I like the ritual, and I like the community, and I just think it's a lot of fun. And I said, do you feel like you're being fake? And she said, no, actually, I talked to the rabbi, and I told him this, and he said, you're welcome. We love it. It's great.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting because I've talked with a couple of Jewish people. One in particular, I was saying, just joking, I'm going to convert to Judaism. And he's telling me how you have to basically ask the rabbi like 3 times, and they'll shoo you away 3 times. Have you ever heard this? They'll discourage you, and you keep coming back. If you keep coming back 3 times, then it'll be like, okay, yeah, let's talk about the conversion process and stuff like that. Anyway.
One day I'll have to go through that.
I find the culture to be pretty interesting also and very communicative, and there's a lot of camaraderie. And I like how the people think.
I think we have a need for sort of ritual and continuity and milestone events in our lives. And that's one thing that I think we lack a little bit in the atheist or secular community.
Yeah, what about...
We have graduation. We have other events, life events, but we don't have sort of the same, I think, compelling ritual that some of the religions do.
Okay, so what about this atheist church? Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah, this Sunday
You have nothing to do with that, right?
No, in fact, I actually went to one and found it to be almost like a Unitarian service, and as it turns out, the people who are starting it, even the people who are part of New York City Atheists who are actually open to it, and I was never close to it, have actually left working with them because, A, they've basically said that they actually don't want atheists to be part of the group, and B, it seems like even though their goal is to do good works, for some, they're finding that it's more of a money-making venture.
Okay.
For the people who started it.
Like a church, like
anything else. They even passed the hat at one of the things.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, and so I felt like, not that they were necessarily disingenuous, but I felt like, I can get that same thing by just going to a bar with a whole bunch of atheist friends. And one thing I want to say, one thing about atheism is that atheism is just a non-belief in a spiritual deity. Okay? It has nothing to do necessarily philosophically with what I think is really attached to atheism, which is a humanist point of view. So when we talk about atheists, we don't want to necessarily paint a broad stroke because the only thing that defines an atheist is someone who doesn't believe in God. Like we're going to say, well, where do you get your morality from if you don't believe the Bible and stuff like that? Well, like we were talking about other books and everything, I think, first of all, I think innately, as a species, it makes sense for our own continuance that we don't kill each other. There's no reason why spontaneously I should reach across this table here and choke one of you, right? So we have laws. And I'm, as someone who is a secularist as well, a secular humanist, I have no problem with people believing. It's not that I'm anti-religion per se. I think that it's a social contrivance that we don't need. And if people want to keep their religion to themselves or in community, that's fine. It's where the religion starts to then go into the politics of which may affect my secular life. For instance, things related to abortion, contraception, who and how people can love, stem cell research, cutouts for people so they don't have to do certain things that everybody else has to do because of a religious point of view. Like, for instance, pray over a child rather than get them immunized and watch them die because you're praying for their health rather than actually helping them. So those are the things that really do concern me as a social scientist, but also as a humanist. That is, if we respect all human life, then it really makes no difference if, I mean, I have, most of my friends are religious. Now, for me, it's more about the content of someone's heart than it is about what their perspective is on life.
That's one of my biggest issues, because I know, like, as an atheist as well, like, there's a lot of hostility towards atheists.
Right.
But also in between atheists, I think, amongst the community. I think people think that you have to be an atheist, you have to be this way, or people on the outside, they look at atheists and they just think something bad about it, you know, that you just believe in this dirt nap, that's it, no consciousness, so you have no consciousness because you don't believe in any religion, whatever.
Right.
And I find that a lot of atheists that I know are spiritual in some ways, and maybe you believe in something beyond this, who knows what it is, some type of energy, whatever.
Look at the sky
Exactly.
at night, on a clear night, and you see billions of stars.
Who knows?
It's awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it's very spiritual.
Yeah.
That is 14 billion years of universal evolution, 4.5 billion years of this planet. The fact that our species evolved, it's so random that every day is a gift in that way. And from a humanist perspective, I think that that's very, very important to remember.
And I think, like, on the spiritual level, too, and, like, all that stuff, but one of the biggest things I know my brother fights for a lot, and the stuff that he works on a lot, is gender equality, which he fights for, especially in the Middle East with Muslim stuff.
Sure.
Is how women are degraded throughout history, and based off of, I mean, if you read the Quran and the Bible and stuff, I mean, they're just degraded throughout history. And
Second class, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things that he fights for. He tries to raise money to get people out of, whenever they're suppressed or they're forced to marry a cousin at 13 that raped or sexually assaulted them earlier in their life, try and get them a passport to the U.S. or to Turkey has worked out before. And I think that's one of the biggest things. Like, they fight for something great, you know, something like you said, the humanist part of it.
And that brings us to the whole topic of, you know, militant atheism, which, you know, we're trying to be painted as militant atheism as if we're somehow angry, like you would with, you know, feminazi women activists or angry black activists. And the bottom line is that most atheists would be very happy just to live quietly in their non-belief. It is only when religious people try to impinge their belief-based thinking into public policy that affects all of us and affects the future of the planet that we feel we have no choice but to stand up and oppose it and to be more vocal and to stand not for atheism, but for a society based on facts and reason and, in some cases, in basic humanist principles.
You may or may not be aware of, like, the Scopes monkey trial. Do you ever hear of that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
William Jennings Bryan.
Bingo. All right, so you've got this, and you think, well, okay, this was settled in the 20s. But you find that every decade you find that there are people who are trying to put theology, creationism, intelligent design, what you were talking about, you know, the world of 6,000 years old, in our schools. That is, remove science and replace it with things like intelligent design, which imply that there has to be a designer. And every time this has been done, each time that people have fought it in the courts, the government has come back, the courts have come back and said, no, intelligent design and creationism is theology. It does not have a place. It violates the separation clause of church and state. So those are the things that we have to be politically aware of, like you say, with a National Atheist Party or Secular Coalition of America or American Atheists or Freedom from Religion Foundation. They all have political arms as well as social arms because, you know, it's sometimes a very slippery slope. And if you let that stand in one place, you could really lose the big picture. And I think that this country was founded as not a country that is for a particular faith, although there are people who will say we're founded as a Christian nation. But actually, if you read the Founding Fathers, most of them were deists, and a lot of them had no place for organized Christianity, even questioning those things, is to let everyone have their fair right and access to their faith if they want to believe in such thing. But the rest of us can also live that same American dream and not have to participate in that or have it forced on us.
And the ironic thing is some of the fundamentalist, Christian, political figures in this country always say, well, the founding fathers said.
Right.
Right.
Is,
Always invoke the founding fathers.
It's hilarious.
Right.
The founding fathers had, a lot of them they did not believe in any kind of God whatsoever, because weren't they, a lot of them were Masons, and there is some kind of belief in higher power in Masonry, right?
Well, as deists, what they believed was not looking at the Bible, which they saw as a social construct. They, for the most part, if you look at Jefferson's writings and even Washington, is that they believed that there was a God, but that it was a God that started everything and then basically turned it back and
let everything...
Exactly. Right. So there was God as first cause, but everything after that, including everything that is a human construct, whether it be religion, politics, what clothes you wear, is what we decide collectively.
And you both do not believe that. No God started this.
There is no evidence to indicate that any such being exists.
Are you more of saying, there is no God, or I don't know? There could be, but you know what? There's no evidence telling me there is, so we're just going to leave it like that.
I am one who, as a non-believer, that is, as someone who does not believe that there is a sky god. And you got to remember that I read this great book recently where someone was talking about how God has changed, right? So you had animism, which basically meant there were gods everywhere, because when there was a thunderclap, boy, that scared the shit out of us, or there was a typhoon that scared the crap out of us, okay? And then the gods slowly moved up the mountain where you had Zeus and Apollo and things like that, right? Now the gods are in the sky, and they're invisible.
It's true, though. We always had polytheistic.
Right.
And then somehow it became monotheistic.
Right.
And it's almost like, just like we have languages. Mm-hmm. All of these different religions are just another way to basically...
try to know the world.
Say the same thing.
Yes. Religion was the first way, and I'm not the first person to say this. I think it was said very eloquently by Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, and that religion was the first way of humans at this point in our evolution to try to figure out the world. And now that we have things like science, right, which is based on evidence and things like that, that is a better way of knowing than just the dogma of a particular book or a series of books.
Yeah, when you bring up Hitchens, that scares me.
Well, kind of him.
I love Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
Actually, I got to say this. I was living in Chicago at the time, and whenever he passed away, my brother and probably about 15 of the people that he works with that are atheists, we all got together and ordered a Johnny Walker Black. And, or actually, I think we all
Jameson's, right?
Huh? Johnny Walker Black Scotch, yeah. Well, actually, I think everybody was kind of ordering and stuff, and we sat down, and my brother just looked over at me, and he's a big Scotch guy, and he just kind of pulls out, he just grabbed a glass, and he had a flask full of Johnny Walker Black, and he just poured it for both of us, and we gave a little toast to Christopher Hitchens.
Nice.
So, it was good.
Very nice.
I mean, he could be an asshole, He was kind of a fucking prick, but still, he was
Well, he wasn't
wildly
a bullshit
intelligent.
artist. He was one of these guys who said, yeah, I'm your enemy. That is, a lot of people want to make nice,
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't believe that there's a God, and I'm an atheist, and if you try to tell me or convince me that it is, whether you teach it to me soft or hard, I'm going to say, no, you're completely insane and wrong, and I reject, on the basis of the fact that you can't prove a damn thing, anything that you're saying. You can equally disprove without evidence what you can't show without evidence. Mm-hmm. That was his point.
What the heck happens to us when we die, guys? I mean, isn't that sad to think about? That's it.
It sucks.
It's over.
That's why this part is so important.
I don't know that I agree that it sucks so bad. I'm just really excited that I had this life, and I don't know that dying necessarily seems that scary or bad or awful to me. If I go to the carnival and I ride on a really good roller coaster, well, it's got to end, and I'm happy I took the ride, and when it ends, I don't feel regretful about it. It's just you had this experience, and I don't know that you need to feel bad. There's no afterlife.
What about energy cannot be created or, can't be destroyed, whatever. Right?
Thermodynamics.
So what about all that, Our souls go up into the universe and live forever some other way, no?
No.
Well, we're carbon-based life forms, right? And we were formed in the stuff of stars. The reason why all of this is here is because
a star blew up and
made
the molecules necessary.
Absolutely,
to create us.
And it is no surprise that the things that make us human organically, right? All of the chemical elements, you find all over the universe. And so, you know what? When this is over, which, again, this is why it's so important to enjoy the ride while it's here, you know, whatever that is significant in terms of who I am will maybe live on in this broadcast or in my writings.
Well, and in other ways, too.
In
I mean,
other
I want to
ways,
say
too.
that the view that this is all there is doesn't mean you don't have an incredible sense of wonder as a scientist, and after having learned the facts of the universe, to feel a sense of awe and wonder that's perhaps even greater than anything that a simple religious story can tell you. I mean, we are, as David said, have a common ancestry with every other species on the planet, practically.
And
you,
the
and
universe.
You have
universe.
probably atoms from other people in the past, and your atoms will go into people in the future.
And the fact that we're even here is absolutely mind-blowing.
Yes.
Mind-boggling.
Yes.
Would you rather be cremated or buried, for the worms at least to eat you, and then go back into the earth and whatnot? Have all your nutrients go back into the earth.
I'll give you a little bit. I mean, I've had two open heart. I've had my aortic valve replaced twice, and both times people ask me this whole thing about, oh, they're atheists and foxholes. If you're really faced with possibly the great beyond, does that make you in any way think about your mortality? And my feeling was, I never prayed for the future, but I really hoped that my surgeon had a steady hand.
Yeah.
You know, a very practical way of looking at this stuff.
Very much.
Yeah. That I got a good surgeon who wasn't going to sneeze when he was pulling my old aorta out.
I got to tell you, as a Catholic, a bad Catholic,
Yeah.
because I am bad Catholic.
Aren't we all?
All Catholics are bad. We're all the
You're
worst.
born bad.
Yes,
Yeah,
we
right.
were
You're born bad.
bad.
You're born right.
I only
Yeah.
pray when something's going to happen that's, that I'm scared about something.
Fear, yeah.
Or want something or something like that. Like, that's the only time dear Jesus, please
Pull out the
this.
guns.
Yeah, happen.
Yeah.
Conquer your fear. That's what you need to do. Read some. Do you guys ever?
Well, and
I-
let me expand on
You do that as a kid by yourself.
Yeah.
It just didn't make sense to me. I don't know. It's just like these gentlemen said. You just you don't really remember becoming an atheist. It's just kind of one of those things. It's like it just kind of happened. You just
But
were.
you're bringing up some really primal things, right? Because in days past, people were afraid of the sun not coming back after the solstice. They were afraid of celestial events, and so they personified them and they created religions around them. Now, we may understand those things today, but like you're expressing, we still have fundamental fears about what happens after we die and what about our basic human condition. And so we still have this sort of impulse to create some sort of fantasy around that to make ourselves feel a little more comfortable.
Prayer can feel very empowering. It may not actually lead to anything, but if the only thing you have is prayer to get you through the night, especially a night where, it's a stormy night, and that can be a metaphor for anything that happens in life, then, I'm not going to tell anyone not to pray. That would be really bad on my part. I mean, it wouldn't be my personal choice to do that, but I would never take that choice away from anybody else.
Unlike hardcore Christians or other religions who will judge you for not praying and stuff.
Or not praying enough, or not using the right words, or not doing the right
Do you guys
ritual.
ever listen or ever read, or I'm just curious about your thoughts on Joseph Campbell?
I've not read a lot of Joseph Campbell.
But he talked about a lot about mythology and stuff.
Yeah,
but he kind of dismissed religion, but he had this, kind of very spiritual part of him, but it was like a balance kind of almost in between.
And that's exactly it. And I think that's the point that most cultural anthropologists take, is that it's not culturally relativistic, because you want to avoid relativism, right? You don't want to say, well, it works in that culture, so it's good, because that allows for child rape.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, no, they have the tradition of marrying at 13, so it's okay. You know what I mean? Exactly. So, but you're right. I mean, we come at the point where we develop this frontal area right here, this level of consciousness that really didn't exist up until our species. Okay, you had Neanderthals, right, who were concerned about death too, because we find that Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon were burying their dead. And not only were they burying their dead, but they were burying them with artifacts. So there must have been some concept, not maybe the way we understand or we hope that there's an afterlife, but there was an understanding of, we hope that it goes on after we go. So the ego is very, very driven.
Yeah.
It's only till we've developed this real frontal lobe where we've developed this consciousness that we developed to such a high fashion this idea of all the religions that are in the world, ancient and modern. Again, that has nothing to do with truth. It has to do with a social psychology and phenomena that makes us human.
Are you noticing that there's like a rapid decline of religiosity in the United States? I mean, I heard that, I can't remember the exact study, but it was something like in like 40 years, there's going to be no religion.
Yeah, Pew was saying this. Like, if you go to Europe, the only people who are in the churches are the tourists. And I think you're finding that now.
Really?
Yeah,
Not in Italy.
There's
not in Russia.
Not in
right,
Italy.
right. But in the United States, and I think this is in reaction to 40 years of the religious right. And by the way, let me just say that atheism is not necessarily a political point of view as well. That there are people on the quote-unquote right of center who are non-believers. There are people on the left of centers who are non-believers. There are people who are just materialists or whatever, just, right in the liberals, conservatives. So I'm not going to bash any...
Materialism is becoming a religion, honestly.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Well,
exactly.
let me jump in on that because it may be or it may not be that religion is declining. And if it is, I still know that it won't resurge and come back. We always have to be vigilant on that. But secondly, one of the biggest growing demographics is our New Age people. In my book, I write about as much concern about New Age thinking, which is equally non-fact based, right? And so we may have a decline of organized religion, but we have a big increase, I think, of people who are quote unquote spiritual, who have a lot of New Age beliefs, who tend to reject facts.
Honestly, I feel like that. Me and my friend Ben Coletti, we both grew up together. Like we both say, "Ask the universe."
Right.
I mean, we do. We just throw it up to the universe, and I don't know. I feel there's something to it. Like.
Well, so my whole thing is teaching fact-based thinking, because I don't think you have to fight against religion or fight against New Age thinking as much as promote fact-based thinking, because if you do that, then those things just sort of die away on their own. And my concern is sort of the bigger picture, and that is, we're facing things like global warming today. And if we don't make good fact-based decisions about these, we're talking about the fate of our species. So that's why I say that, we have grown past the time where belief still serves us well as a trait.
And the internet too, I feel, is like one of these.
It's changed the world.
Yeah, it's why it's so much information. That's why I think it's declining.
And you find that the internet is not only just sharing information, but for people to get together. That it's like the social medium, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or any of these, Tumblr, a billion of them out there. And I think that you do, at least in America, see decline of organized religion. And I think that's because the 20 to 28-year-olds coming through because they grew up with the internet in their lives and they have all this information to facts and access to information. I mean, if you look at the Gallup surveys that were done just a year ago where it said, well, every demographic that you could think of, gay, lesbian, black, Hispanic, Muslim, that potential voters would rather vote for all of these different protective classes or other groups before an atheist.
Really?
Right. So we still have that stigma, yes.
Yeah. However, you find that in the Pew Research that of the 18 to 26-year-olds, 70% of those people would be very interested in voting for someone who's a non-believer, have less of a problem with that.
So more in the future.
Yeah. And you see that with how even churches are responding today. They're more about social services, and you see things like come in for a beer even, or read poetry in church, because churches always have to remake themselves to remain relevant because it's a business. There are market forces, you have competition, and a lot of things can affect your profit and loss statement.
It's just interesting. It's just like information is what really drives the end of organized religion. And I can just speak for Catholicism because that's my background. But you had Martin Luther translate the Bible into German or something like that and distribute it. And then now, oh my God, people can actually read this. Right. It was all in Latin. Right.
Well, it was that, and it was the idea of mysticism, that the Roman Catholic Church being a political entity, and there was no other game in town. It was like, what Martin Luther was really doing very radically was telling the Catholic Church that your doctrine and your dogma is not right for the next. You had your 1600 years. It's time for something new, and that's how Protestants came
But I mean,
about.
right down the line, Galileo, right? It's not Earth-centered, it's sun-centered.
Right. And we know what happened to him, right.
Yeah,
right.
But right down the line till in the 1960s, I mean, everything was in Latin in Mass until the 60s.
Until Vatican II.
Right, in Vatican II. And then now it's all in English, and now people are actually, wait, that's what they're talking about?
Right.
Really?
Right.
And the internet, that's just total destruction.
Yeah.
Right.
I wanted to ask, did you guys see this thing? I think it was earlier this week or last week. Ben Stein. Did you hear about that?
No, what's that?
You got to read it.
What's his latest?
I think it was like the Today Show or something, and he read this thing. They posted, I saw it online, I can't remember what it was at, and I read it, and he was just destroying atheists. Like, about how it's become this terrible thing that people, like, you know, are becoming more atheists in America and ignoring their religion, and look how the shambles that the earth is in, and all this stuff. And he just went on, and basically says, whenever you see things going on in the world, and genocide and rape and all these things, and I'm not quoting exactly, I'm just kind of, because it was like a good 7 paragraphs. He's like, don't ask any questions, basically, or whatever. And I was just like, it was absurd. It was crazy. I didn't know he was that hardcore.
I'm not surprised.
Granted, he was a speechwriter for Nixon back in the day.
Yeah, he's probably a naughty shill.
Don't forget that, you know, a lot of people use, who was it that said, good people will do good things, bad people will do bad things.
Ernest Hemingway. You feel good after you do something good. You feel bad after you do something bad, I think.
Well, it was that, but it was like something like, good people will do good things always, bad people will do bad things always, but if you want good people to do bad things, you got to have religion. And when you think about it, you know, going back even as far as the Civil War, you know, there was a religious justification for slavery. A theological justification to keep people in bondage.
How are we going to regulate the masses without religion? Right?
What do you mean, like regulate?
Well, I mean, how are the powers that be going to control everybody?
Yeah, I mean,
religion controlling everybody right now. People are dying all over the world in the name of religion. It's absurd.
But Bobby, by asking that question, you are making the point inherently that religion is used to control people, and it is something that is used to manipulate people to work against their own self-interest.
I guess we got mass media and propaganda that people don't realize is propaganda. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't heard the Ben Stein thing. I'll look for it. But you find a lot of critics against atheism coming from all walks of life. And you know what? That's fine. As an academic and as someone who's a humanist, I think the debate is, even doing this program, is really about the discussion about the stuff. You know, I'm not saying I own the truth. I'm not even sure exactly what truth is. But I know what I conclude in terms of my own experiential life and the things that I've seen in my life to bring me to where I am today. Yeah.
What about aliens? Do you believe that maybe like a lot of our religions came from ancient aliens that landed?
Oh, like Van Dyneken.
Right. Yeah.
No,
you don't subscribe to any of that
I think maybe all the life on Earth, right? A transpermia. What is that thing where the Earth got hit with meteors that actually carried the biological stuff that grew on all us? I think that is very much a possibility. But I think that religions are really all homegrown.
But you're an anthropologist. I mean, have you seen some of the current Vonnegut stuff? I mean, some of the stuff that he argues is crazy, but some of it is very compelling when you see like the bearded man, you know, little figure that is thousands of years old, and it looks just like somebody with a helmet on.
Well, you know, we tend to put ourselves into nature sometimes, right? We reflect. Like Carl Sagan has this great thing where you would see crabs that look like they have a face, right? And so people would throw them back because you don't want to eat a crab that has a face. And then what happens is they become the spirits of your dead ancestors. And so why are they the spirits of your dead ancestors? Because they look like they have a face. So what happens is in the gene pool of the poor crabs that don't have a face on their back, they get eaten. So what's left in terms of the evolution is to have more face-like crabs so they can sustain themselves. And then we build a religion around that or a theology around that.
Yeah.
But Bobby, to your question about aliens, I would have to say, I mean, my perspective on it is that certainly I think there's a statistical certainty that there's life that exists on other planets.
There has to be.
Now, however, I don't believe there's any evidence that it's ever made it here, and I don't think there's much plausibility in terms of anything we know or can imagine that anybody could possibly cross the void that exists between us.
You think
I
really
really
get out
doubt that we would ever actually meet or even hear from other species in the universe.
Somebody went out there with a lawnmower and made a crop circle like that.
Well, the guys who did it showed us how they did it.
Really?
Yeah.
They didn't do it with lawnmower. They had boards attached to ropes. That way they bent bent the stalks right at the bottom. They didn't cut them.
Yeah.
And then they pushed it, and the way that they pushed it down, they went around and stuff, and it was...
Yep, and even after they came out and told everybody how they did it, people still sort of refused to believe that. You'd rather believe in, some mythical alien that left circles.
Well, I think it's people that, have a hard time with religion. They need to believe in something else. So that
they have something else.
It's like you were talking about. It's the ego of man.
Yeah.
It's like
And,
we
I
need
remember,
something.
this was really funny. I remember seeing an interview about crop circles, and there was what I consider a very poor scientist that they interviewed about this. And he said, well, I can see no way that this could have been done. So clearly it must have been the work of aliens.
Right. That's a great leap. It's like saying, like for years people said, well, of course, the pyramids were built by space aliens because no one can do that. But you know what? If you've got 500 years and slave labor and engineering and mathematics...
Yeah, and not even just slave labor. It's like
do that.
hundreds of thousands of slaves.
Right.
It's like an entire civilization.
Yeah.
And you had the few that were your king, tyrants, or whoever.
Right.
And then you had just
everybody
the rest of
else.
Society. You're going to build this.
Well, let me introduce another topic here quick, which I think relates. And that is, one of the things I talk about in my book is this idea that there's a trick to everything. And so the bottom line is that we all might have experienced some things that we can't explain. Or we have a friend who did, or a loved one who said, but I know I saw a ghost. And then you say, well, I trust this person, so there must be something to it. How do we respond to these stories of sort of these inexplicable paranormal things? And my answer is, think when you go to a magic show. You see the magician on stage do these seemingly impossible things, but you know there's a trick. And if you only saw maybe a camera angle from the back of the stage, it would be obvious. And the same thing is true with all these other things. Just because you don't see how this could have happened, it seems miraculous, but there's always a trick. And if you hold in your mind that one basic premise, there is always a trick, I just don't know it, then it doesn't seem like we're inundated by all these sort of amazingly impossible things.
So you've never had a ghost experience?
I have, yes.
You have?
Yes, I did.
Okay, can you tell me about that? Because I have too.
Yeah, well.
And that was very real.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
And I
it
think,
was.
Okay.
And so we've all had these kinds of experiences, and I have too. Mm-hmm. And I think the difference is how you respond to those. I mean, the scientist says, I don't have enough evidence to draw a conclusion, but I know there must be a trick when I come in to learn it. I'm not going to jump in with some sort of made-up explanation just to make myself feel better.
Can I tell you one? There's two of them. I'll tell you one really fast. My grandfather died
Love a good ghost story.
up in Connecticut. We had to sell the house. Me and my mother flew up from Florida, and we went rummaging through all his stuff and, getting all his personal possessions in order and things like that. I was in his closet rummaging through, and I just heard from the kitchen, Bobby, come here. I went out. There's my mom holding her finger up, and it's white from here to here. And my grandfather always held her finger like this.
Right.
And I swear, I am not lying. She's like, Bobby, oh my God, look at my finger. And I'm looking right at it. There is a ring right around it, and it's white from here. And she's like, Grandpa's holding my finger right now. And I was like, wow. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how to explain that.
Well, you know
there.
what? Something happened. And I think the right response is, I'm okay with not knowing what happened. But I know there must be a trick that I'm not seeing.
And not a trick like someone's trying to obfuscate or do something mean to you.
No.
It's just that, without the evidence to say that this is what you believe is a supernatural phenomenon, you can't test the supernatural with science. You just can't, because what the supernatural implies is that it's outside the realm of natural science. So you can't test something that's mystical with a Geiger counter or something that you could actually measure, because it's just not possible.
And, good scientists don't dismiss all these reports.
Right.
I mean, even Carl Sagan spent many years going out investigating every paranormal report that he could find.
Right.
Because he was enthusiastic to find something that you couldn't explain, because that would be a whole new realm of science potentially.
How did Sagan, how did he die of, he died of cancer?
He died of cancer too, yeah.
And then
96, yeah.
Right, and then our boy that we were talking about also with the
Chris
GMO
Hitchens.
shots, he died of cancer too.
Yeah.
It's just, that's what I'm thinking about. Whenever I think about these atheists, these staunch atheists, and then they die prematurely of cancer or something horrible, I just think, oh my God, they're getting back what they, right?
Well,
what
a
they
lot
put out.
of religious people.
That's how I
Hey,
no, but I
Christ
don't,
died at 33, right?
Yeah, there you go.
He got what he was putting out.
You know,
Okay, that was a little mean. Maybe I should have said that.
But you know what? I don't know if you can actually draw a correlation to that, because people die all the time for a lot of different reasons, and there are some atheists who live to a ripe old age. So,
Joseph Campbell was 90 years old, 89 years old, 88 or something like that.
So, again, it's a lot of it is what we base our perceptions on, our own experience and our own thoughts and our own biases, And I think what science tries to do is take those perceptions and biases out of the method of knowing.
So talking about perception and biases, I'll relate a little experiment that was done. In England, they had an auditorium filled with people that listened to a psychic reader. And so the psychic reader is one of these people that gets up and says, "I'm sensing your brother. Is it? Or it starts with a J or is it a K?" And so they had people do surveys after this. And they asked for their perceptions about how accurate this reader was. And they would get, people reporting 80, 90+% accuracy. Well, then they'd look at the actual transcript, and they'd see it was like 10 or 12%. Because we tend to perceive and remember those things that are correct. We dismiss all the ones that don't match our worldview, right? And so our perceptions are very biased.
Yeah. As an anthropology professor, how excited would you be if before, you check out and go to heaven, obviously, that...
Oh, no, I'm going to hell.
Yeah. That there was evidence of alien life, like non-disputable, just...
Like,
absolute evidence.
It's there. It would be wonderful, because what it would say is that we are now known to be connected to something, even though the universe is much bigger than ourselves, that the idea that we can not only know some other being, hopefully it's an intelligent, and it's not just a microbe or something, like, we go to Mars and we find a dot. Well, okay, that shows life, but doesn't necessarily show intelligent life, or, it would be wonderful, because then we could at least, hopefully, if they're not looking to knock us out, because let's say if they're really, really advanced, what did the Europeans do when they came to America?
Yeah.
Right? So there is a...
Let me have your resources. Thank you.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's like, we'll enslave you now. That was the two things, and it's very interesting, because Carl Sagan, always the optimist, would think that we would have this discussion and there was an optimism and that we would be able to learn from. And then you have someone like, who wrote Brief History of Time? Hawkins, who has the exact opposite,
yes.
Who says, if we make contact with an intelligent race, they're going to come here and we are going to be basically cattle.
Really?
Yeah.
Right. That's what he says?
Yeah. Yeah, that will basically become the Mesoamericans who were destroyed, 90% of which were destroyed.
Sense.
Yeah.
Look at history.
Yeah.
That proves that we've done that.
Well, it's two fundamental worldviews, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of sort of optimism and seeing the potential good in everybody, and the other was the more practical, seeing the dark side.
The Indians were very optimistic, though.
Yeah.
Right.
They're coming out there loving life. They never even experienced
look at these new
they had a
people
great time.
coming to
Oh,
shore.
people.
Yeah. Hey.
How about Columbus Day? Huh? When
We celebrate that, right?
have we ever seen one holiday completely change? In my lifetime as a kid, when you get, in Catholic school, we would get off.
Right.
And all we heard was good things about Columbus.
Nina Pinta and
The
Santa
Nina
Maria.
Pinta and Santa Maria.
Yeah.
They come. And now, if you say that on Facebook, Happy Columbus Day or something,
Right.
I get a million hits of why I'm a complete asshole.
Day of infamy.
Right?
Right, exactly. It's like, we raped and we gave diseases and we knocked out, destroyed culture and language that had existed for 35,000 years through our own Western imperialism.
But to see that holiday just completely change, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Making small strides as a human race. Still terrible, but...
And that was like, I think, it was a History of America or something like that. The People's History.
Oh, People's History. Zinn.
Howard Zinn.
Yeah,
he
Howard
was like
Zinn.
the first, I feel like, in that book to describe
And came out.
exactly what Columbus did, the horrible atrocities Columbus did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had a very left-of-center point of view on most things, never really finding a lot of positivity in
Was Zinn
the
an
American-
atheist?
I don't know if he was an atheist. I know he was left-of-center. It wouldn't surprise me if he was.
Now, there were a lot. Now, this is one thing that I found interesting because, we make T-shirts called Fat Enzo, right? We're starting to get into more, general, things and stuff. But the way we started, we would do it based on people of history, politics, pop culture, our personal heroes, Mark Twain, Bukowski, things like that. And when I was on the NYCA website, you have that little video about all the people of history,
Right.
all these movers and shakers that were atheists. And so many on there were my personal heroes.
Really?
See?
And I was just like, wow.
Yeah.
That's what really inspired me. Because
that's
I had
great.
seen you. The reason why I sought you guys out was that I had come upon you over at Columbus Circle.
Okay. All right.
And seen one of the table days that you were
Oh,
having.
Ken Bronstein would be very happy about that.
I was talking to the gentleman, and I picked up
Yeah.
one of the flyers and things like that. And I got on the website, and I saw that. I was like, wow, I want to talk to somebody there.
Yeah.
Have to. Because that's what first got to me, all these people, like Einstein and things like that. I actually heard that Einstein was a fan of religion. I had heard from a staunch Catholic gentleman told me about how Einstein, even though he was Jewish, he would always, living in New Jersey, he would always, if somebody had come to his house and they were a priest, he would always let them in and he'd always talk to them.
Yeah, I mean,
and that proved that he believed in.
Obviously, Catholics never lie about it.
I worked at St. Peter's College for a while, and which is a Jesuit institution, and I could tell you, I had a lot of fun with the people who were both believers and the priests there, because regular people, who am I to judge? I won't disagree with their basic stance in terms of belief, but going out for drinks and hanging out is no issue with that. With Einstein, though, he always said that he believed in Spinoza's God. And Spinoza's God, of course, is like the God of the universe. Not even like first cause, but like the idea of the ethereal, that we're all part of the same scheme of life. The toad and the grass and the dog and the human, that we're all part of this same, whether you want to say mystically or not, energy or carbon and things like that. And that go ahead.
Yeah. And I'd have to say that, that's something that I think many of us come to eventually when you study science, study the universe, study the cosmos. You sort of start to get this sense of almost Zen-like oneness with the universe. We're all waves in this particle-wave duality of the universe, right? And we're all interconnected with the rest of the universe and with causality forward and backward. And I think many scientists do come to this sort of profound, almost, to use the word, spiritual sort of feeling of our place in the universe.
Yeah. People say, well, if you don't believe in anything after you die, doesn't that bum you out? Don't you make sense? No, I'm an optimist. I've always been. Not because I believe that you go on. It's because, if I'm going to be part of this world, if I'm going to be in this world, whether or not you believe in or agree that you have free will or not, that, I'm going to make this time the happiest time I can for myself and the people around me. And for me, that is the opportunity that I think that most atheists or most humanists want to bring forward, is that this life, however brief and short, what did Woody Allen say, is that it's full of misery and it's terrible and it's all over too soon.
Right.
I sort of take that same thing, that maybe there's that misery, but, I truly conclude that in my lifetime that this is a good world, that people are fundamentally good.
And I think that leads to a fundamental worldview from most atheists, that because our time here is limited, the earth is a wondrous place. We want to be good caretakers and we want to be good nurturers of.
Right.
And we don't have sort of these rationalizations we make that, well, it's all here for our use anyway. Yeah. And it's all going away soon anyway in the rapture. Right. So we don't have those rationalizations.
We had someone in Congress 2 days ago who was an evangelical say that global warming can't be right because God only is allowing one natural disaster, and that was the Great Flood. So global warming can't really happen. God would never permit it.
and that's the problem with, that's why I sort of harp in my campaign for fact-based thinking, why I harp against the small belief thinking. You might say, well, what's wrong with having your little beliefs? But the problem is that every little belief you have, sort of conditions you to accept bigger beliefs. And pretty soon you're believing that, well, global warming can't be real because the Bible says this. Right? And it sort of undermines your capacity to deal with real problems.
I got 2 points, though. Okay. No, it's like talking about religion and being like a social control system. Yes. You have so many people that just, whatever, we're all going to die and we're going to go to heaven, right? So it leads
rape
to
the planet. Who cares?
It's easier to be kind of like just the slave kind of or whatever, just not really become ambitious like these people that you see on the NYCA website. All these people that were my heroes, they were so ambitious and they were so successful. It's almost like, okay, I only have this life.
Right.
Let's hit it out of the ballpark.
Right.
Let me really strive to...
Or whatever it is that you're going to do it the best you can. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I think it's the scariest part about it is super religious people is the fact that they are in such a rush to get on to that
end times.
End times, they're in such a rush, and that's all they talk about, and they just keep skipping out on this, so it's just making life miserable for the entire
So who
planet.
cares about health care?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Why health care? Who
Right.
cares about people being murdered for very minute religious views? I mean, like even amongst Muslims, well, I believe a little bit more of this than that.
Right.
Okay, well then I'll saw your head off or kill your entire family.
Right.
Or your entire town, whatever.
Right. It's dancing on the head of a pin, and I think Bill Maher said it best in Religulous at the end of the movie.
Hilarious
where he said,
movie.
he said, I think sort of tongue-in-cheek, God forbid a religious person actually gets a hold of a nuclear warhead, because if you really believe in end times, well, why not usher it in, by blowing things up, rather than maybe taking a more rational approach.
Well, and I think his final word in that movie, if I recall correctly, I think his final phrase was, either we grow up or die.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
That was great.
And that's what I feel like, with the atheism, we've evolved our brains so much where we're like, okay, wait, I can be moral.
Right.
And I can be a good person, ethical.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to have this like little baby belief system.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's
keeping me well at night so I can sleep good.
The dirty little secret is that there's no need for a God.
It's a contrivance. It's
Yeah,
extra.
no need.
At this point in our human evolution, I think that we can come to the conclusion that without evidence for there being such sky god, deity, whatever you want to say it, why do you need it? What is it in you that requires it? Is it indoctrination? Is it authority? Is it the idea of pleasing somebody else? It's all these other psychosocial things that relate to your ego or your community. And so I think the most basic question, Tyson's right, are we at a point now in our primate history, in our human history, that we can really let go of these ancient ways of knowing? It's not that we can't rejoice in the history of them or understand them and acknowledge them as part of our collective human history, but aren't we ready for the next chapter?
Yeah, the next step in evolution, I think.
Let's
like
move
expand
on.
our minds
Exactly.
as an overall just civilization, just to move on and go to the next step. And I think we can become more intelligent as a whole.
Yeah.
People can become more intelligent.
Yeah.
More spiritual, or whatever you want to call it.
Sure. Full well knowing that we'll never know it all.
Yeah.
The thing about religion is that religion says we know it all. Mm-hmm. And the answer is always whatever the God is.
And if you say you don't believe in God,
right.
one of the biggest arguments of religious people against you is almost always the same thing. And it's out of fear. They always say, well, what if you're wrong?
Mm-hmm.
I hate that so much, but that's what you get. Whenever I tell people I'm an atheist, like, you don't believe in God at all? You don't, this or that? No. And they go, what if you're wrong? Mm-hmm. You're going to go to hell.
Well, it turn it around and say, well, you spend all this time in ritual and everything. What if you're wrong?
What if you're wrong? Exactly.
Right.
What if you're wrong? You wasted so much of your life on something that
worrying about things.
But they have eternity, though.
Right.
You teach evolution, correct?
I teach, yes.
What do you think about the stoned ape theory? Have you ever heard of that?
What's that? Yeah.
How do you feel about like these hallucinogens, ayahuasca, things like that? There's a theory called the stoned ape theory that basically says the apes picked the mushrooms out of the poop and they would eat it, and that would expand their consciousness so much that led to us, the brain grew in size exponentially in like a very short time period.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that theory, but I'd want to see evidence for it, because I don't accept every theory in evolution is equally valid. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, like if I look at evolution, what I'm looking at in terms of showing, what the cause was of, let's say, brain growth, right, is that you have the fossils and you've got the DNA. You know that somewhere around 4 million years ago, we became fully bipedal, and bipedalism led us to be able to free our hands. Leading us to free our hands gave us binocular and stereoscopic vision so we can see forward and in 3D. That allows some species with random mutation to grow larger brains. And even at the time when...
The random mutation part.
Yeah.
Stoned ape.
You know what? Carl Sagan used to get high every day.
Yeah,
yeah, he was a huge
marijuana
pothead. Yeah, exactly. And he even wrote something under an assumed name talking about how getting high helped him existentially do all the things that.
I'm a big proponent of the legalization of marijuana for recreational use. Absolutely.
Go to California and everybody.
Well, I feel like it will be here soon.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of people, like, especially nowadays, talking about psilocybin mushrooms and ayahuasca and things like that are good for you, and it leads to, like, your evolution in thought.
I think they can be good if you use it very sparingly. I think you doing those things like all the time and just using it as an excuse, becoming like victims of somebody like Timothy Leary, who just said, "Oh, just eat acid and everything's going to be okay." And then he left all these homeless people who just ruined their lives because he just said, "Oh, eat acid." And people, "Oh, Timothy Leary's great." No, Timothy Leary was an idiot.
Well, what I'm not talking about for recreation, I'm talking about like how the Indians did it as like a rite of passage kind of thing.
Ritual and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, like a ritual.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what are your thoughts on that? No.
I
As a professor, you obviously.
I mean,
can't.
I entertain it as something that would be really interesting to research. I don't know enough about it myself to even really hazard an opinion because I just don't have enough information to be able to form one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry to bum you out.
No, it's quite all
Yeah,
right.
please pass the
High hopes
joint.
for that question,
Yeah. Please pass the hookah.
Yeah.
You know, and we'll yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
videotape. So.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So, what about the NYCA group and everything like that? Like, how would somebody, if me and Martini here were interested in coming down and seeing what you guys are all about, what kind of events do you put on?
Yeah, it's
that
really easy.
stuff.
NYCA, just check out the website, and they have monthly meetings.
What's the website?
It's a little cryptic. It's
Yeah.
www.nyc-atheist.org, I believe.
But the thing to be aware is that they do have the monthly meetings, but they have a lot of side groups as well. So if you're
Yeah.
interested in philosophy, there's a philosophy meetup. If you're interested in book and video, David
Right.
does a book and video meetup. So there's lots of different activities for different people. There's a younger contingent that does
Right.
some meetups, some
The
more
20,
social
30-year-olds, because, people are always concerned, well, is it just like, old guys like me and Tyson here? You know what I mean?
And we have a newsletter, and so that also lists the activities each month.
Yeah, and meetup.com. If you do New York City Atheists, you'll see everything. I mean, New York City Atheists, of all of the atheist groups that are affiliated with American Atheists, which is sort of the mothership, has the largest number of group meetings and involvement, whether it be street tabling. I mean, they've got about 5 or 6 different events monthly. They bring in people from all walks of life, all areas of interest to talk about not just atheism, but science, philosophy.
Right, one of the things I really like is they do a Sunday brunch.
Yeah.
And they often bring in some really good researchers, scientists. I find those talks just really interesting. And they're not about atheism directly, but they're about different things going on in the scientific world or other social activities that are going on in the community that are worth knowing about.
I think that's great to have like all these different programs and stuff. And I think that's what you were talking about earlier, like an organization of almost kind of like having these things to do. And
there's no end of people to talk to.
Well,
They will be very excited to talk your head off. So
You're missing out on the ritual aspect, right? I think that's what the point was before.
I do circumcisions.
Oh my God. That's got to stop.
that's always a bit of a bone of contention in the atheist community, right? Because there's some faction that would like to do sort of more church-like stuff and church community sort of things that they would do. And other people say, no, we don't want to be like a church. And so it's always a bit of a bone of contention.
I think that alone, just doing these different things, it's expanding people's minds and giving them knowledge. I think that's all you could ask for. I mean, do things for the community, and you can help people and do
soup
little
kitchens
things.
and things.
Yeah,
And there are a
stuff
lot
like
of atheists and secularists who are doing that, not just under the banner of American Atheists, but there are a lot of groups. Doctors Without Borders. That's a huge secular organization. The American Red Cross is a secular organization. There are tons of secular organizations that do a tremendous amount of really good, not only just in the United States, but around the globe, that have nothing to do at
it's
all
really
with,
sort of unfair to have this idea that only religious groups do good works. I mean, we have many groups, as David said, that we take for granted that are secular groups that are doing a lot of good work all around the world.
Yeah.
The Peace Corps, right?
Yeah, exactly. The Peace Corps.
Exactly.
Look
Which
at
you
that.
were in.
Yeah.
The table day thing is pretty church-esque, though. I mean, that's something that you would see from.
Yeah.
Come on.
You would.
Look at this.
At least we're not in the subway.
We got 3
Right.
against 1 here, Bob.
Yeah.
No.
I
I'm
mean,
not
we have
saying-
no Watchtower publications or
That's
anything
right.
like that.
Yeah. But it's like that, though. I mean,
It's trying to get the word out. You know what I mean?
And it's also trying
and
not
it's
to show that we're not hiding in the closet.
Right.
That we're okay, that we're actually people that will talk to you, and we
Right.
aren't scary.
And the difference is that we're not proselytizing in the sense that you better become an atheist. But if you go to all these other tables, take our literature, become of the body.
Be
know
very
what I mean?
afraid and join us.
Yeah.
And I think atheists have, for the most part, I mean, obviously there's some atheists that aren't, but the forum for debate is very open. Like, discussion stuff. In religion, not so much. You can't really go in there and be like, well, let's talk about this and let's debate a little bit, because that just creates tension and animosity and everything.
It creates issues, exactly.
Yeah, but with atheists, I think there's a,
The
a good
atheist
open
group is
forum for
definitely
debate.
not the forum to get everybody agreeing with what you say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love lively debate. That sounds fun to me. I would love to come to one of these. And
Oh,
really
you
start checking
should.
it out. Absolutely.
Just look at meetup.com and
Yeah.
you'll find tons of stuff. Like, Ken Bronstein, who is the president and started it, Jane Everhart, who is the communications director. In fact, tonight at 7 o'clock, we've got a program going on, and we always meet in bars. So it's a very friendly thing.
That's great.
Yeah, so we're eating, we're drinking.
I mean, I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Well, I know my brother, whenever they do stuff with the NAP and
Yeah.
different chapters and stuff, that's what they do. They keep it very casual. They meet at somebody's house,
Exactly.
have some drinks, have food, or meet at a bar, restaurant, something like that.
And if you're single, and if you want to meet somebody who is basically of the same mindset,
How about astrology? Do you believe in astrology? Because I'm an Aries.
I'm
the
March
best.
29th, so I'm Aries. All right.
I knew I liked you.
Yeah. And you see, now that's astrology, but I'm okay with it.
I'm sorry. I believe in astrology. I don't know. J.P.
Okay.
Morgan said millionaires don't believe in astrology. Billionaires do. And I really do find that the personality traits. Maybe I sound like a quack or whatever, but
I think it's something to do with,
Yeah.
no, I don't know. I'm not even going to get into that. But I will say, I met this girl recently, and Bobby the other day, he just looked at me and he goes, "What's her sign?" I said, Gemini, and he goes, "Oh," and he pulls out this app on his phone. This fucking guy pulls out an app on his phone, and he goes, "Leo," for me, and he hits Gemini, and he just goes on this whole thing and and not only just reads a little bit.
it was right though, wasn't it?
It was really good. And he just, which I've never been big on that stuff, and he just read the entire thing. This guy's obsessed with horoscopes and all that.
I am. Whatever.
A Catholic obsessed with horoscopes. He's all over the place. He doesn't know who he is. He's lost.
Watch out, because the Catholic Church sees that as demonology.
Yeah,
so
Satan has
yeah,
his hooks at you.
yeah.
Now, like I said, though, I mean, I don't ever go to mass or anything.
Only a Catholic when he feels fear.
Exactly.
Okay.
Oh, the shirt that I'm wearing. I made a
I love it.
T-shirt.
Yeah.
This is our logo, the dog pooping. And,
In
it's
Dog
called
We
Fat
Trust.
Enzo, and In Dog We Trust. Now,
Uh-huh.
I put that together partially because it's funny or whatever and amusing, but
Mm-hmm.
also because you had the court case where we were trying to get In God We Trust off of the
Remove
dollar.
the coinage and everything.
Right? Off
right.
the coinage and everything?
Right.
Now, who was...
By the way, I fully support.
Which only started in the 1950s.
Really?
It was never. If you listen to the Pledge of Allegiance, the insertion of "Under God" came in 1954. "In God We Trust and Our Money" came about the same time, and it was all related to the Cold War. Up until then, it was not there.
And what's the argument for it? Isn't the argument for it like, they do say separation of church and state. However, putting that on there doesn't mess with that? Or
Well, because it's not a particular God, right? But the whole idea of having to necessarily call in the ethereal when first of all, our founding fathers didn't really see it as necessary. Second of all, if we are a secular nation, then God versus Satan versus the potato monster versus something like that is in itself a bias towards something. And if it wasn't there before, is that not violating the constitutional protections of a founded secular nation?
And, that period really marks sort of the beginning of what we saw as a very rapid growth in sort of religious activism in politics. And part of the problem with these little things that they do, like In God We Trust, is that then they leverage that to get bigger and bigger and bigger concessions.
What do you mean we
towards
can't
religion.
have the Ten Commandments in the courtroom?
We have In God We
you're
Trust on our
They
coins.
just do
Right.
a little thing. They can step
Right.
onto
Yes.
that, try and get a
Right.
Setting precedents.
right,
Exactly. Yep.
exactly.
Right. And so what happened with that court case?
I'm not sure where it stands now. I haven't been
I think it's
following.
been ongoing.
It's
forever.
ongoing. Yeah,
These things take so long.
yeah.
Right.
They're sort of glacial in their time frame.
The wheels of justice. Yeah,
Well, in God we trust.
right.
If people
Yeah.
want to reach out to you, once again, it's
Paleolibrarian.info or davidorenstein.info.
and you blog about different things on anthropology, evolution, atheism.
Free thinker issues.
Now, what's that, free thinking?
Well, it's another way of saying non-belief more than anything else.
Okay.
When people don't, it's
It's
almost
a positive way,
it-
nice way to say it.
It's like a euphemism for atheism,
Right.
In a way. That's really what it's about. It's not thinking that's tied to any particular dogma or theology. So it's supposed to be.
How long have you been teaching for?
Oh goodness, I've been teaching for almost 20 years.
Obviously, you really enjoy teaching, correct?
I love it. It's my first love.
Do you ever talk about the atheism stuff in
No,
class?
I mean I teach comparative religion.
You do?
Absolutely. But I never, it's like
Just from an
anthropological point of view,
standpoint.
because there are a lot of different ways you can teach. You can teach it
Horus.
definitely all the different gods, and not
Right.
only just gods of Mesoamerica. You can talk about just a whole slew.
It's crazy, right? When you think about all these.
Confucianism, which is really not a god-based theology, but a philosophy. It's about the human connection to the spiritual, is what really comparative religion is all about. Is like, how do we deal with that as humans? Because you do see, and I always teach my students, because I teach it from an anthropological point of view, is that the idea of something otherworldly has existed for thousands of years. Just like atheism, the idea that there is no God is not new. It has been around philosophically for as long as people have been praying to something. Mm-hmm. There have been people, if you look at the earliest writings, the idea that maybe there isn't something as well.
Oh, really?
The Greeks and the Romans, sure, Epicurus.
Well, and I have to say, you brought up one of my favorite philosophers is Confucius. I really admire and love him, and he lived in a time where there was lots of deities, but his perspective on it was that, that these deities may or may not exist, but if they do, they're so far beyond us that we can't know what they think, and we can't influence their actions. And so we should just focus on adopting the most perfect interaction between human beings as possible and not consider the gods.
How do you feel about Buddhism?
And that's the oldest philosophy known.
It is?
Is there anything older than Confucianism in terms of a world philosophy?
It's up there. I mean, you could look at...
certainly one of the oldest.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at the Code of Hammurabi, and you could look at, these ancient Babylonian things that are around maybe a few thousand years after that. So, yeah.
Right, okay, good.
Yeah.
How many different religions, there was a bunch, right, that had...
Well, there's at least 2,000 sects of Christianity.
But, when you look at the history of religion and Horus...
Right.
Wasn't he the first where it was born of a virgin,
right?
And then
the comparative
died,
nature
came back to life, right? After a certain, they all follow this same storyline,
the same general storyline. Yes,
right,
exactly.
Yeah, because it's the human mindset, and that we tend to be very imitative as primates. And everything that we invent, we tend to think that, this is the first time we've had it, especially with religion. But then you realize, here are those themes running through it all
These
the time.
are themes that were part of our social culture from past civilizations that we've integrated and adopted.
And there's no reality that says that at the time of when Jesus may or may not have lived, these ideas didn't exist as well. So they were brought into the mythology of...
repackaged.
And things like that. And there are, of course, many people, atheists, and people who are researchers who may not be atheists, who question whether or not Christ was an actual historical figure, which is very, very interesting, because you really don't have necessarily a lot of accounts at the time of Christ's life of his existence. You have it 40, 50, 60, 100 years afterwards.
After these guys are writing.
But not even Josephus, who's writing, you're not finding at the time. And at the time, the idea of a Jewish Messiah, by the way, every mother's son is a Jewish Messiah.
Really?
Including yourself.
Including myself, yes. There were several messiahs running around at the time that Christ was said to be the Messiah, so...
John the Baptist, right? Wasn't some people were thinking that he was?
Yes,
at the time
absolutely.
As well.
So you've got a time period when people were ripe for what they believed was to be Messiah. You have this person a rabbi, who is thought to have turned over in the temple and said all these moralistic things. But again, we have the apostles writing this stuff. Jesus never wrote anything down himself. Everything is based on the book of someone. And even these things were being written 40, 50, 70, 100 years after the incidents were supposed to occur.
What about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Have you heard this? There's a guy who was commissioned to research it for 14 years. I forgot where I heard this, and then all of a sudden he started talking about how he was an atheist, and he
well, because there's nothing wrong with the cultural artifact, right? Whether or not you believe there's a God, if people are writing about God 5,000 years ago, well, that doesn't necessarily prove that there's a God. It just means that people believed in some type of deity. As a cultural artifact, it's brilliant and it should be preserved, because I think that's part of our world history.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Gill, just
Yes.
to shore it up,
We've touched on a
let's
lot
talk about
of
the book, Belief in Science and the Science of Belief.
Yes.
A guidebook to fact-based thinking.
It is available on Kindle and Amazon.
Yes.
It's really cheap because it's more of a public service. And it really does touch on a lot of things that we talked about here. So I think if any of your listeners would like to sort of follow up or get more depth on some of the conversations we've had, I definitely recommend them taking a read. It's an easy read. And it goes into why we believe stuff, why that's not necessarily the best thing. And more importantly, it presents an alternative, which is science and scientific methodology.
Mm-hmm. And then how can people reach out to you, like your Twitter handle or a
Anybody,
website or anything?
If anybody wants to reach out with nice comments, Tyson Gill at hotmail.com.
Okay.
Tyson Gill, one word.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much. And by the
Thank
way,
you very much.
you know, I forgot to even mention where we're podcasting from. We're podcasting from your college.
Yes, from Medgar Evers College, but this is not sponsored by Medgar Evers.
Of course
I
not.
was told by my provost to say that.
Disclaimer
This is right.
However,
the views that I am sharing are my own. And
given with the theme of my podcast, I always do everything mobile, and we always
Right.
choose a place that's either iconic or important to the individual.
Thank you,
Right,
and we're
this-
happy to host you.
Thank
Yeah,
you very
definitely.
much. It was great.
Yeah.
FatEnzo.com, 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 FatEnzo.com. FatEnzo.com, 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 FatEnzo.com.